Analyzing development today on the Democratic side of the 2016 presidential field. It's already conventional wisdom that Hillary Clinton is running and could have an easy path to victory in the primaries, but today looks like she may have a challenger. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, self-avowed Democratic socialist, has hired veteran Democratic strategist Tad Devine to guide his potential White House bid. It doesn't get much more establishment than Devine, whose work as a Democratic operative goes all the way back to the Carter administration. He was a senior advisor to Al Gore's presidential campaign in 2000 and John Kerry's in 2004, and his hiring is seen as evidence that Senator Sanders has gotten serious about running for president. And joining me now, Senator Bernie Sanders, chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. Senator, are you running for president?
Well, let me make a quick correction. I have not hired Tad or anybody else. Tad is an old friend, part of an inner circle, and is somebody I have talked to and will continue to talk to, but I have not yet made a decision about whether I'll be running.
But you're talking to him, but you are talking about this with him.
Yes, I am, and I'm talking about this to people all over this country. Look, Chris, there is massive disaffection and dissatisfaction in this country with what's going on. You know, the middle class is disappearing. We have more people living in poverty than almost any time in the history of America. And the gap between the very, very rich and everybody else is growing wider and wider. And people are asking, what's happening to America? How come the average person works longer hours for lower wages, and yet 95% of all new income in the last few years goes to the people on top? How come we have the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth? So the people, I think, want to hear an analysis and understanding of why the middle class in this country is disappearing. And they want people to begin to stand up to the billionaire class and develop strategies which protect working families.
So let me ask you this. You're an independent in the Senate. You caucus with the Democrats. Would you, if you were to run, would you run the Democratic primary?
Well, that's a question I'm just getting. First of all, I have to decide whether or not I will. And the answer to that has a lot to do with the kind of grassroots support that may or may not be there. Are people prepared to get engaged in a grassroots, unprecedented type campaign in which we are taking on the incredibly powerful billionaire class? That's the Koch brothers, that's Wall Street, that's the private insurance companies, that's the drug companies, that's the people who own America. Is there the energy for people to begin to be engaged in that type of campaign, or are people sufficiently demoralized? How do you raise the hundreds of millions of dollars that you need? I don't get campaign contributions from the billionaire class. Can you do that? So I've got to answer those questions, Chris, before I make the decision.
So one of your biggest issues on Capitol Hill is Veterans Affairs. You're chair of that committee, or you will be for the next few months.
Right.
And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, aside to talking about a potential run, was obviously today's Veterans Day. And, you know, we had this huge scandal blow up in May about long wait times, about the cooking of the books at various VA facilities, and the inadequate care. And then you and Senator McCain came together. A bill was passed in August. It was signed by the president. And then I feel like we kind of all lost the thread on where did things improve? Did it work? So give me a status report.
Hey, Chris, thanks for asking, because I think most of the media has forgot to ask that question. And let me just back up and say a few things.
Yeah.
What happened in Phoenix and elsewhere, where people are lying about the waiting periods, totally unacceptable. It's an outrage, dishonorable activity, and those people must be punished. But on the other hand, let me tell you something that veterans throughout the state of Vermont and veterans organizations all over America say, and that is that when people get into the VA, the quality of care is quite good, and that the VA is on the cutting edge of a number of medical areas in terms of telehealth, in terms of complementary and alternative medicine, in terms of this exoskeleton development, which will allow people with spinal cord injuries to actually get on their feet. So to answer your question, I worked with Senator McCain. We passed a $16.5 billion piece of legislation which will provide significant new money for the VA to get the doctors and nurses and medical personnel they need. It will also enable, in those areas where waiting lines remain too long for VA health care, for veterans to go into private health care or to go into community health centers.
So there's also, though, a question of, there's kind of an, aside from funding, right, there's also, seems to me, a question of accountability for are the people who were engaging in this, you know, messing with the records? Have they been punished? Has there been accountability? And has there been the kind of reorganization that might have been needed, as shown by the reporting we learned of, to make the VA run better?
Secretary McDonald is, I think, a very serious guy, and I think he is tackling these issues. I know that some of the Republicans want him to fire half of the VA tomorrow. It can't happen because what you want to do is when you fire somebody, you want to make sure that if they appeal, you have the evidence to make that firing stick. But I do know he is working very, very hard and will get rid of those people who have been dishonorable and those people who have been lying and those people who have been cooking the books. The other thing that he has done is worked aggressively to reduce the waiting times. Essentially, what the scandal was about is that you had in Phoenix and elsewhere people waiting much, much too long to get into the VA. And that has a lot to do with a lack of doctors and nurses. But he is working very hard and, in fact, successfully to lower waiting times for veterans.
Senator Bernie Sanders, it is always a pleasure. We will stay up to date with your possible campaign. Thank you. All right. What's